Welcome, everyone. This is webinar 2 in Pivotal 180's series on careers in project and infrastructure finance. This is part of a two-part series. Our first webinar was on June 4th. This featured our internal team addressing some very specific topics around what companies, roles, levels of seniority look like in this space from our own direct experience. That webinar recording can actually be found at a link. We'll post that in the Q&A that we can see. Otherwise, we'll add it to the chat, and hopefully you can see that there. And so that recording, you please go back and check it out. If you didn't attend, we're going to continue on a new topic today. Today, we're joined by an expert panel of senior leaders and executives spanning the gamut of the finance world, from developers to debt. And the goal of today's session is to break down what interviewing and job seeking, what that process looks like in the current market. So my name is Dylan Parks. I'll be leading the panel today for Pivotal 180 alongside my colleague, Amir Mayer. Amir and I are both full-time trainers here at Pivotal 180, but in a past life, we led transactions ourselves in project finance debt, tax equity, venture capital, and advisory. Pivotal 180 itself is soon to celebrate its 7th anniversary year. And I'll say corporate years are not quite like dog years, but they're similar. So I'd say at this stage, we're kind of like recent graduates ourselves. We're not quite middle age, but we're on our way. We have now trained over 10,000 individuals across a huge range of roles and countries in PF and infra finance and modeling. If you'd like to train with us, please reach out after the webinar. Check out our website through the link that is contained with the previous webinar. And we absolutely look forward to seeing you in one of our classes very soon. On our panel today, we are joined by Nanda, Goxie, Chris, and Catherine, who together share decades of experience and billions of dollars in capital. And their careers kind of, as I said, span that gamut from developers all the way through debt and a variety of different roles in between. From a logistics standpoint, we will start the panel today with some direct questions for each panelist, followed by some bigger, broader discussion topics for the whole of the panel to weigh in on. And we'll then turn to your questions. To best help facilitate that process, please utilize the Q&A function in Zoom, which usually can be found on the toolbar in More, the little area with 3 dots. So inside of that Q&A, place your questions. There's also the functionality to upvote questions. So please do that in support of others' questions that you think are particularly pertinent. We're going to use this function to help address the most pressing topics toward the end of our program here. And then if there are more discrete questions or things that can be addressed in writing, we will try to do that as well as we go along. Also, if you do have access to the chat function, feel free to use that or the Q&A itself to continue that discussion alongside our panel. Excellent. Let's begin. So to begin, we're going to turn to Nanda, who is a veteran lender, now heading global head of the project finance team at RBC. And I have the question, in the interviewing and hiring process, does cultural fit matter? And if so, like, how do you discern that in an interview?
Thanks, Dylan, and thanks for the invite to participate. Yeah, cultural fit matters a lot. I mean, I think that, this is a job where we spend a lot of hours together. I'd like to say that it's 9 to 5, but it's really not. And so fit matters a lot. And how do you discern that? I mean, it's sometimes it's just a judgment call. You try to talk to people and suss out really what their personalities are, and you try to get a sense of who they are and how they'd sort of mesh with the team. But at the end of the day, you're to some degree you're taking a flyer, right? You're trying to get a sense of what somebody would be like, what it's going to be like sitting next to somebody, for a lot of hours a day, right? It's kind of the airport test. Do you want to be sitting next to somebody on an airplane in an airport? It's like when you're voting, people ask like, would you like to have a beer with this guy? And sometimes that's what it comes down to. And so a lot of times when we're interviewing, it's like, have you worked on a deal with this person? Like we tend to, especially when we're doing lateral hiring, we tend to look for people we've worked with on other transactions or whatnot and had good experiences with, because it really does, you do want somebody that you do feel is going to be a good fit on your team.
I like the airport test, right? You're sitting in there, you're going like, who am I excited to be sitting next to on this flight? Especially
Exactly right.
that long haul flight. You're like, I this is a make or break decision here.
Yeah.
And so do you, in general, this is still one of those intangible qualities, right? So this is something that's a bit harder to see exactly, but it's really just kind of that sense that you get.
Yeah, no, it's true. And it is hard. It is hard. And I think anybody who's hired, right, I'm sure has had the experience where both it cuts both ways, right? Where you've hired somebody and you sort of you realize at some point you're like, ugh, yeah, I've made the wrong decision, or like this was great. Like this worked out exactly how I wanted it to work out, and this person is great. So, um, it makes a big difference. Like somebody could be really great at their job, but if they don't fit for whatever reason, personality wise, it makes it really difficult. Because at the end of the day, this is very much a people job.
Yeah.
It's about relationships, both internally, like with your team, and externally with clients.
I think a lot of people shy in the interview process of being like really true to their personality or expressing any kind of personal anecdotes and stories. Do you find that to be just as you would expect, sort of counterproductive to the professional setting, or have you found that to be particularly useful in any fashion?
Yeah, no, I actually agree with that. I think that a lot of times people don't let who they truly are come out in an interview process, and I think that's particularly probably true of junior people. And what I would say is that you should actually make an attempt to be who you are in the interview process, because you're going to be who you are at the job, right?
Right.
And who you are is good, right? And like for me, I would say like I'm somebody who likes to joke around, and I'm pretty blunt. And I think what I've learned in my career is that it's served me well actually, and that it's not a good idea to like not be that person in an interview process, because that's who I'm going to be at work. So it
Yeah.
people should see that person, because if I'm not that person and they don't like that person, they're not going to like working with that person every single day. And so what I would encourage people to do is be who you are in the interview process, because that's who you're going to be at work every day, and people should see that.
That's excellent. Thank you so much, Nanda. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, of course.
Uh, we'll turn to Goksenin Goksi, the current CEO of Go Renewables, as well as an adjunct professor of project finance at Columbia and Johns Hopkins. So, Goksi, my question for you would be a mile wide or a mile deep? From a strategy perspective for current job seekers, would you advocate more for the broad reach for roles and role titles in sectors that are adjacent or potentially related, or to drill down into some of the niche pockets of their skill set and into like niche roles? What are your thoughts?
Thank you, Dylan. Thank you, Amir. Hi, everyone. My name is Goxie Osterkari. I run my own advisory practice and teach classes. I've been involved with the Pivotal ecosystem since the beginning. That's how I met Hayden and team. So really, really happy to hear that you're celebrating. You're about to celebrate your seventh year. That's great to hear.
Thank you.
Um, so by the way, I also really like what Nanda said. Just 30 seconds on that. I think I find that people shy away from mentioning anything personal on their resume. I think that's such a waste. At the end of the day, everyone, that you see hundreds of resumes, and what really distinguishes some of these people are who you are as a person, and you need to let that shine through both in the resume and in the interview. But to your question, Dylan, so. Um, if I think about what I really enjoy about project finance and what we do in general in the renewables infra space, It is that, as the modeler or as the transaction person, you really have a hold on a wide variety of different domains, right? You have to understand policy. You have to understand the legal side of things, like all the legal documentation that's going on. At the end of the day, your model is actually part of that legal documentation at the end, right? So some associate, some lawyer prints out the model and attaches it to a lot of these LLCAs. You have to understand the tech side of things. You have to understand, of course, the permitting regime, right? You have to understand the local laws and interconnection rules. So none of these things are necessarily, you don't need to be master of these things by the time you apply for a job, but over the course of your first few years, you're going to understand a lot of these things. So being able to, you're being interested in these topics, being able to speak to them a little bit, again, depending on what level you're joining, analyst, associate, maybe senior associate, you don't need to be an expert, but being curious, reading up, and being able to speak to a lot of these topics a little bit, each of them is going to be really valuable in your job search. And I'm assuming, curious to hear other panelists, but pretty much everywhere I worked in banking or developers, IPPs, we do have a modeling test, right? Usually you want to see the modeling skills of the person you're bringing on as an analyst associate. So you have to pass that modeling test. And that means you need to have, some depth in that arena. You have to be comfortable with numbers. You have to be comfortable with organization, making sure, storytelling, right? Making sure you're telling the right story. So those need to be there. But I think that those just get you in the door. What really make you stay, make you shine is the curiosity and the breadth that you're gonna bring or you're gonna show.
You yourself have had a pretty broad career. Have you found that there's a decent flexibility in the, with that level of curiosity and with the idea that maybe today I really want to dive into policy, so I'm going to go find that role, and maybe tomorrow I want to shift more to the project transaction world. Are you finding that is allowing you finding that movement between those has been not seamless necessarily, but possible?
Definitely, I think someone told me early in my career you want to be triple threat. So not just doing the model and being good at modeling, but you have to also be able to talk to it. And really, in order to talk to it, you have to understand the fundamentals, right? You can just it's relatively easy to just be able to punch some numbers and get the results if you're mathematically inclined. But can you get in front of Nanda, right? And then be able to explain why the returns dropped 100 bips, right? Why? What was the cause? Can you walk through and can you come with proactive solutions? And in order to do that, right, you have to understand the drivers of the model. And that really requires, again, a level of curiosity and knowledge across multiple domains.
That's excellent. I really appreciate that, Goxie. Actually, that's a great segue. I'll turn over to Chris. Chris Holtz is an equity investor, and one of the heads of the corporate development at Generate Capital. And that's the question for you, Chris, is where do you see candidates fail most frequently? Are they in the modeling test itself that's typically associated with these jobs, or in the interview, or is there kind of a shared barrier to entry there? And what might be done to correct some of those challenges?
Yeah, well, thanks. Let me just start off by thanking you both for including me. Dylan, great to speak with
Absolutely
you.
happy to have
And,
you.
and Amir, great to see you again. Yeah, look, I mean, I think that it is a bit of a both. That I think the ways that you fail are just different in those pieces. I mean, if you kind of think of the top of the funnel, ideally, we're not wasting anyone's time or our time and putting them through a modeling test that you know, when we think that the culture fit isn't there. So I think to Nanda's point, like the initial interviews are usually the cultural piece. And as Goxie said, like someone needs to stand out in that point. They also need to be able to speak to, deal experience, be able to show some quantitative acumen before we're like, okay, yeah, let's spend, 5 to 10 hours of their time and a couple of ours on a modeling test. So I think that the kind of early interview piece, what I think is most important to kind of like mile wide or mile deep in prepping for interviews is that those early interviews are really I think, a culture screen and also a screen for how genuine is your interest. Have you actually taken the time to get to know this company? Do you know what deals they're working on? Do you know the transaction history of the person you'd be working for? Have you actually done your homework, or is this just one of, 50 interviews you have set up over the next couple of weeks?
Yeah. Do you want this job or do you want a job?
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So I think getting through that phase of kind of the top of the funnel is easy enough to do, but just at a critical time to make sure you've done your homework. The modeling test, I think is, it's fairly objective and it's pretty binary. It's like, do you meet the bar or not? And I think the thing that I've seen people fail at most is they maybe do the modeling tests and they get to the right answer, but they don't demonstrate kind of the level of expertise, the level of curiosity, creating a dynamic model, being able to sensitize across the right variables, setting up a scenario manager, setting up clear outputs, having consistent formatting, really just
Yeah.
showing that if I'm going to work with you, you're going to give me a product that I can actually use, sensitize, use my very limited time on to get to the right answer and not have to like second guess and not ask you for a bunch of iterations. I think that's where you really set yourself apart and get to, I think, the harder screen, which is then, are we really going to work together? And I think, in terms of what can be done to correct that, like, I think it's just a combination of two things. One is reps, and I think the other is
Yep.
mentorship. So I always joke that I would actually be nowhere in my career without having met Amir in like my first week of grad school. So I took renewable
That wasn't
energy.
a planned plug, by the way. It just so happens that they're
It
friends
wasn't.
from
I
a
mean,
past
it is,
life.
you can look at my resume and it's kind of the genuine truth. But I took renewable energy project finance at Yale. Amir was a TA then. I think, a lot of that curriculum sort of evolved into the Pivotal 180 universe and doing those tests and eventually becoming a TA myself, grading a bunch of those tests, like those are the things that, teach you how to spot errors quickly, how to not make them yourselves, how to really take a model from like good to stand out. And I think those reps are important, but also having somebody who is more senior than you, more experienced than you can look over your shoulder and tell you, here's something I would do to tweak this and make it a little bit better and catch your blind spots. I think seeking those things out are important. And there's a million modeling tests you can get out there. Not to plug Pivotal 180 too hard, but I do know Amir to be the best. Um,
We both do. We both know Amir to be the best.
yeah,
I
yeah.
will still accept that reality for sure.
It's something we all have to accept.
100%. Well, on diving into like getting that kind of understanding of the group that you're sitting in front of, right? There's like a common reality. People start to use things like LinkedIn and connections to try to get coffee chats and kind of a light introduction to people and maybe reaching out. Do you have any thoughts on how to make that a less transactional feeling, or do you have any realities that have worked really well in the past of someone, looking to get your attention, really just to get kind of start that idea of a relationship that might show up eventually in an interview or as a mentor in that position? Have you seen anything succeed that doesn't feel like it's immediately transactional, a quid pro quo for what they're trying to get?
Yeah. I mean, I think if you're in school, that's a pretty easy avenue. You can be working on a side project, like a private study, whatever that's related to that person's, area of expertise. You can be part of a club. I was part of the energy club at Yale, and I was the career coordinator or something like that. And so, like, being able to just be kind of front and center with a bunch of potential hirers was very helpful that way. I mean, I think another way is just going back to sort of my like first point around, do you have, genuine interest? I think that if you're aware of something they've been working on, if they're, a senior person and they've closed a transaction recently, like there's pretty decent odds that they'll be quoted in some article somewhere,
Yeah.
commenting on the transaction. I think just asking to learn more about a specific piece versus reaching out and saying, hey, like I'm interested in this sector broadly, I think always goes a long way.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Chris. I really appreciate the thoughts there. And finally, Catherine, VP of Investments at the developer Soltage. Um, Wanted to ask you, like, again, you've gone through this process, you've fit the culture fit, you've interviewed appropriately, you've passed the modeling test, you've demonstrated that you are passionate about the position itself. What is an ideal first 6 months look like for any company for a new hire, kind of regardless of seniority, either above your position or below your position?
Yeah, of course. So in our perspective, I think an ideal first 6 months is really about showing your work ethic and motivation. I don't expect everything to be right and perfect in the first 6 months, but what I do like to see is somebody who wants to be there and is showing up, showing that they are interested in the work that we do. Um, and what I mean by that is, at least from the development angle, there are a lot of moving pieces at the development shop. So I'm on the finance team, and as part of the finance team, we interact with all the other groups that come together to build a project. So in those first 6 months, what I look for is somebody who has a genuine interest in understanding how the business works. So they want to understand, or they are interested in knowing how a project moves over time, and figuring out what that means, like where is the project in financing? Why is this thing in financing so important? Why do we have to go ask these other folks for some information, and why is that relevant? And
Right.
being an owner of their process versus just a taker, right? So somebody who sees themselves as really owning the process, regardless whatever stage they're at. I think that speaks to having this like self-initiative and this self-starter instinct, that can serve a person really well. And that can be anywhere, like doesn't have to be in this industry at the development shop, but I have found that that quality, regardless of your experience level, is a phenomenal attribute to have in a coworker or in a manager or in somebody that reports to you. I'll share an example. So for instance, on my team, we run a lot of models. So if, let's say, we're assuming in this example, we have an analyst coming on board and we've asked them to run a financial model and to test tax equity scenarios. I don't want that person to just inherit the model, hit a few buttons and turn it back. What I'm expecting is them to challenge the assumptions, because as many of us know, we can all fat finger something, type in the wrong number or accidentally delete, and that is a cascade of serious issues that can happen, but you may not see that reflected totally in the returns. So if the returns change a little bit, I like knowing, or I like seeing that that person has actually taken some time to figure out, like, oh, why did this change? How does changing the system size affect our underwritability of this project? And take the time to really say, okay, I've been asked to run this model. The expectation, if I'm running this model, is that I own this model, and when I present out, I may not know everything about it, but I've at least done the personal work required to speak to it and ask the right questions. And that's the kind of thing that maybe I hadn't even asked them to do. Like maybe they just took the to my earlier point, the self initiative to say, okay, I want to know how this works, because I own this part of the process. And
In
so
the growth toward
Mhm.
ownership, where do you see the balance between, because I think we've all done that in the young part. We're like, oh, this is the right thing to do, and then you do it, and then you take it too far, and then it's like the person comes and
Yeah.
goes, hey, hang on a second. You don't understand all of this, and you've emailed a client now. We've got a bit of a problem. Where do you see
Yeah.
the line between like that self-starter initiative and then checking in for guidance? Like where do you see the line there, or what do you have any recommendations on how to walk that line well, so you're not only taking work from your boss, but you're also, checking in with them appropriately, so you're not stepping on toes.
Of course, that's a good distinction. You're not just like running off the rails here.
We've all
Yeah.
tried it. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I like so to the points that were made by the previous folks in the panel, this is where I think, and this may not seem like the most obvious answer, but culture really matters. I like to check in multiple times a day. So I like to say, okay, take 2 hours, think about this, come back. Let's just see where you are. And what I mean by that is by setting up a culture where people feel like they can do that, like they can come and ask questions and check in without feeling any fear of not looking smart enough or whatever. And on my behalf, I also have to make sure I set a standard of culture where folks can come and talk to me, and it's not like an intimidating or scary process, because ultimately we're all on the same team. And so you don't necessarily want one element of the process to go off the rails and down a totally different direction and nobody else is involved. The only way projects get built in finance is if we're all working together.
Excellent. We're all rowing in the same direction.
Yeah, exactly.
I really appreciate that. Well, no, I thank you guys. Those were all. I love the way those questions sort of layer and answers layered in on each other. I think just general kind of thoughts and takeaways. The idea that your personal reality still matters. That's part of the culture fit, and also who you're going to be in the office every day is who you should be in the interview, because that's a designation of where you want to be. That there's so many hats in these roles that you have to wear, that don't be afraid to go and learn things outside of what seems like the direct track, because that'll only benefit you. That these aspects of the models are one piece, but there's more to it, and that you have to understand there's some objective skills, and then there's those intangibles that you have to start to build out. And then again, it kind of remaining curious, asking questions, taking initiative, but making sure to check in and like fostering that good culture from both the position up to the manager and then back down as well. That's excellent. So I think now here I'll stop sharing just for a moment so we can get all the panelists in full view. I think now I'd like to turn to like a larger topic and just open it up more broadly to get everyone's thoughts on this. So generally speaking, right, there are a few common things that we think of that kind of tighten labor markets in finance, broadly speaking. General business cycles, maybe macroeconomic or monetary trends. We're all kind of aware that there tends to be sort of cyclical kind of seasonal layoffs that occur, sometimes like corporate restructurings or division restructurings, things that kind of move around and tighten positions in these various roles. But it seems like right now in this current market, everything has been kind of overshadowed by the idea of like kind of general market tightening as a direct result of AI. And so there's two aspects I'd like you guys to consider in this. So as AI continues to evolve and its role continues to evolve, where do you actually see things starting to tighten and likely to continue so? And then where do you see opportunities for real growth? And from the perspective of like the labor and jobs perspective. And I'll just open this up to the floor.
I'm happy to go first.
Please.
This is a very timely topic, of course. I hear this a lot from our students as well. Every week someone's coming, especially, foreign students who are already worried about their visa status. Now this AI issue is coming, and they're hearing a lot of they're reading a lot of news saying, well, JP Morgan is not, is cutting this much, and they're not going to hire the next analyst batch, or maybe their analyst batch is going down from 100 to 50 or whatever, right? And they're really worried. And my number one advice is, we should not be trying to outsmart the AI. Like, look, even at the senior levels, yeah, I think it's okay to admit that I'm not going to be smarter than AI. There are things that AI does really well. There are things that AI does not do very well. And financial modeling, luckily for all of us, it's still not that good. It's getting
Right.
there. Maybe give it 5 more years. Maybe it'll get there. But at the end of the day, like, this thing has access to entire knowledge of the internet, right? It has access to that. And me trying to be better just on a pure knowledge basis, it's going to be tough with time. However, there are a lot of things. I think we talked about this being a relationship business, right? And it's still going to be a relationship business in 10 years. So I think there are a lot of things that we or job seekers can do to do better than AI. Like, you can be a better human than AI, and that's really the only way you're going to beat AI, right? And what are those things? So those things are showing up on time, right? Showing up on time, showing up with a smile on your face, being nice to people, being curious, asking good questions, showing up prepared, and don't be an asshole, right? That's I think those are at the very minimum, things that we could all do to make sure that, you know, make sure that we're gonna come out on top. I think reality is we're all going to use some level of AI, regardless of what our jobs are, what our titles or levels are, and that's just unavoidable with time. But I think, you know, if I think about who do I still gravitate towards if I'm hiring, right? This was one of your other questions, Dylan. What are some of the intangibles? Look, at the end of the day, knowing how to model is a base requirement. Everyone needs to be able to do that, fine. But if I'm between two candidates and I need to decide, I'm going to look at things like how hungry is this person? You know, how enthusiastic and curious is this person? And maybe there's a little bit of a bias there because, you know, I'm an immigrant myself and I hustled really hard to be able to get into this field back in the day. And so when I see someone else, you know, they don't need to be an immigrant, but when I see someone with a similar passion in their eyes, I gravitate towards that. And I think, you know, that those are the human skills that I think we all need to foster a little bit more.
I love the
And
idea that the way to work alongside or work above AI is just to be more human, because it's the one thing it's not going to be capable of doing. And actually, to be fair, I think the speech you gave, the short speech you gave on what to do, is effectively what I've been trying to tell my 18-month-old, and what I would hope for her future of being punctual and bright and curious, and maybe not to be an asshole. I'll save that language for a few years from now, but I do think that really consolidates the idea down to some of its roots. Anyone else on the panel? Any other thoughts on this about where we see this shifting, how we see this shifting? And the
Yeah,
thoughts for the people out in the audience of what can they think through on this?
I'll follow up briefly. A used to, so we still have to train AI. So for instance, we were debating whether or not to hire an entry-level analyst or to spend more time with AI. And one of the things I discovered personally is every time I ask Claude to do something, I have to prompt it for several hours to get what I need from it. And that's okay. It's learning and but it's not as fun as training a human being. And what's nice is the human being, or let's say a new analyst, is actually joining the team and being a contribution to the team just by being there. So you have a person who's new to the team, who's learning, who's absorbing information and can continue to grow and absorb new information and draw parallels from different work streams. So if I have them working on a model one day, but they're researching like a financing requirement another day, the person can sort of make the correlation for why the two things are relevant to one another. I haven't yet seen that with Claude, and so I just want to sort of, I love AI because AI is freeing up our time to be more of the intellectual and to be the thinkers. We haven't had a time to really do that because we've been so focused on efficiency and productivity. It's alleviating time spent on busy work so we can be freed up on the things that I think really matter. And it's certainly not a replacement for a person.
Well, and the things we do, right? It's relationships. Investments are still a human decision that we'll ultimately make. Myself, I think that at some point someone's going to make a fully AI-based investment decision, and whether that goes poorly or well is going to be kind of the market litmus test for how much we use this. Because I think at the end of the day, it's still going to have to be a human decision because of all of those intangible pieces and the interplay of all those pieces that you can't necessarily feed into the system right now. Chris, your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything that's been said, so far. Like, certainly the human component of coming into an office, like, cannot be overstated in value. Like, as someone who worked from home for 5 years post-pandemic, and like, slowly lost pieces of my soul, I think that way. Like, being back in the office has made such a giant difference. So I agree with all that, the human component. And then, to Catherine's point, like. I think that honestly, the strength of AI just requires somebody to be like better at modeling at an analyst level than previously, because you need to be able to assess the outputs of it. I mean, you really do have to train these things. I was using AI, last night on like a pref investment, and it's a pain. Like it's a pain to go back through it and be like, why did you do this? Like what, this is the weirdest IRR calculation I've ever seen. And so like having somebody sit over that I can trust, that I know is not an asshole and is curious and is going to have done the work to build their skills up to sort of understand what the errors are. Like that's a layer of security I think we need in addition to kind of the speed that AI offers. So I would just say, dig in even harder on the modeling skills.
I said something to a student recently about the idea that, in order to be able to use the tool, you have to learn all the fundamentals first. So it's like the reps you were talking about earlier, you've got to get reps doing it so that when you see it done, you know it's done right. And so, like, if you jump to straight to using the tool to skip the step, those reps are not going to be as hardwired in your mind as for someone who's done it over and over and over and over again. Um, Nana, any thoughts on this topic or anything to shift or add?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I spend a lot of my time financing data centers, so I have like a very love-hate relationship with AI because I know
Yeah,
that I'm contributing to the downfall of humanity in certain ways. But
we
also, I
all are in
mean,
our own special way, I'm sure.
yeah, no, exactly. But also we have our own internal AI tool, which is effectively based on Claude, and there's a huge push to use it, but I wouldn't say that we're like not like we're still hiring junior bankers, and we're busier than ever in project finance. So, we're not displacing junior bankers, at least in this space right now. Um, and it's helpful. It is for things that would have taken hours, it's saving a lot of junior time, right? On things like comps and comparing credit agreements, right? If I'm like, hey, what are the last five precedents on this term or whatever, like that, it's saving a lot of time on things like that. So, I think it is helpful to like see the positive sides of it as well, but it is like it is not going to replace ultimately judgment, and things like that. So like, yes, I need to know the last five precedents, but ultimately whether I accept it on like whether I accept something on a deal, like
Yep.
is my judgment, right? And
Right.
why it matters and what that deal term means and why whether you accept it or not and like its relevance in this deal is really a judgment call, right? And so that's I think like what it comes down to. So is AI like should we be concerned about it and like you know like do I understand the angst around it? Absolutely yes. But like do I think that we can just wholesale like remove a layer of people? No. Like
Right.
I think like when we think about like let's maybe step away from finance for a second, right? Like I know like law is another industry where people are
Yep.
freaked out about it, right? And it's like, oh, like do law firms need associates anymore? Yeah, because how do you become a senior lawyer if you've never been an associate, right? Like candidly.
Right.
So it's just like, I mean, I think we have to like just take a step back and think through like how, you're gonna create people with judgment and experience if you don't actually do the thing and get in the reps.
I think
So efficiency. Oh, please, Gutsy.
something, Dylan, that I wanted to say as well. I think it's worth highlighting. I think with AI, really what's going to happen for all of us, doesn't matter if you're an analyst or a managing director, you're going to be a manager of AI, right? So AI is going to be one of your employees. Maybe, as an analyst, you're going to get a task to compare some term sheets, as Nanda said, right? Or maybe build a pref model, like Chris said, and you're going to use AI to help you to make it more efficient for yourself. The problem is, and again, this is a common theme. Maybe Amir, you see this in at Yale as well. Students, we don't allow AI in classroom at Columbia, and students find that a bit awkward because they see all the news, all the companies using AI. And my advice to them is, look, you're going to use AI once you start working. That is for sure. However, you cannot, if AI is truly going to be one of your employees and you're going to manage AI, you cannot manage something you don't understand nothing about. Like you cannot just
Yep.
prompt without having never built a tax equity model. You cannot just give a prompt to Claude and expect the result to be perfect. You have to build a couple of these with by hand manually, and get all the reps, like you said, Dylan. And then at some point, you're going to be so good at it that you're going to be able to prompt AI and be able to understand where it gets it wrong. And that's, I think that's the thing that we cannot lose sight of. Like, just because this thing makes us more efficient and makes us sound smarter, we cannot just let go of our own knowledge and just offload everything to this tool.
Well, efficiency is an interesting question. So I think we're all aware that roles in this space tend to be a bit cumbersome in terms of the amount of hours a week or hours a day or hours a month that we spend at it. Do we think this efficiency gains us time back where we get to go home, clock out at 5, spend a little more time with our families? Or is this more likely to create efficiency, meaning that the volume of work that we can do just gets exponentially larger? Just a quick thought on that. Anyone clocking out earlier because of the AI tools?
Yeah, I think it's called Jevons paradox, right? There's a term for it in economics where the more efficient, the new technology doesn't actually make you work less, but you just produce more of it. So, I mean, I don't know the answer, but based on what I've seen, also this kind of goes to post-pandemic working from home, right? Like, I think, did we work less because we're working from? Not really. We're actually getting more work done, right? And then a lot of people actually reported working longer hours and because they were more efficient in a way, and maybe because they were at home and doing all these other things. So to be seen.
Chris?
Yeah, I think that's a smarter answer than I was going to give. I was just going to say like no. I mean, I think particularly in this moment when like there's just so many dollars chasing energy at the moment. There's I don't know, at least in our sector, there's always another deal to do, and so I think that rather than clocking out, you're kind of just on to the next one.
Yeah.
So I don't expect a
You
lot
finish it
of
faster, you got more bite behind it.
yeah.
Again, just the AI in and of itself, like the deal flow in AI is just so
Yeah.
like truly insane.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, there's too many dollars going.
One thing
That's
I'm
actually
noticing,
please.
sorry,
No, please.
it is, I don't know if we're clocking out at 5, but what I am noticing is, for instance, if I'm reviewing contracts, let's say I'm reviewing offtake contracts, it is helping me get through the contracts faster. So sometimes I would read through a contract and I might have to talk to a colleague because maybe I don't quite understand a provision, or it's a new provision. Instead of going to that colleague or to my in-house counsel, I'm using Claude to ask Claude questions. So I'm like actually using Claude to help me critically think through something. And then Nanda's example of pulling precedents terms from prior term sheets or agreements is another area where no, I'm not clocking out at 5, but I am getting more thoughtful work done in a faster period of time, and I'm doing more of it on by myself versus calling counsel or somebody to walk me through a point, which frees you up to do more work later. But also, I also
But deeper
think,
work, right?
but deeper
More
work,
thoughtful work. Yeah.
and I appear more educated on a particular point because I've had this sort of critical thinking conversation with Claude for the last 2 hours on some contract. And actually, that's how I would encourage a lot of new people to use Claude, is not necessarily to do the work for you, but to help you think through something you may not know right away and sort of challenge yourself with questions and use it almost like as like a refined Google search or something like that.
I really appreciate that. Well, I think so. I think it's a good transition to think about this on a more direct level. So with these impacts, right, in financial modeling, which it's not quite up to speed yet, but is improving generally, document synthesis, writing, memo writing, credit memos, things like that. People are starting to play with that idea. What does this ideal candidate profile then look like in the next few years? And is this something that like we need to start seeing now, or is the market going to lag back a bit? And it's possible that profile looks a lot like what we've already sort of brought forward, but the idea of more human, more personable, that kind of hunger and passion that you bring to these things. But is there something that, I think a lot of people are thinking about the idea of going out and getting like an AI certificate or trying to show their command of the tool in this process. And again, we're all kind of building the ship as we sail on it at this point, because I don't think anybody is particularly an expert in it except for those that built it, and even then maybe not so in certain contexts. So, what do you, as people look to the next couple of years, what are you seeing? What do you think? If somebody comes in and they've done the model reps and they've set out the curious analysis of they have enough passing legal contract and not analysis capacity, and they're personable. Is there something else on the AI side that you'd like to see that where they've engaged with it enough as a tool potentially?
I mean, unless they're trying to be an AI consultant or go into AI specifically, I don't think I will be looking for any AI certification. I think we're really talking about more of the same things, fundamentals, like we said, right? So are you able to model? Are you able to work your way through the documents? And are you a good person? Are you an interesting person? Like the intangibles. And I don't like even saying intangibles, but it is. Um, those are the same things that I would look for. And if I'm looking for any certificates, again, not to plug Pivotal 180, but I'd rather see actually I did see a resume the other day, and he did take quite a bit of your courses, and that gives me more confidence than if someone said, "Oh, I took the Google AI blah blah course," that I have no idea what that even means. Of
Yep.
course, being familiar and not being afraid to use AI could be one thing. I don't think you need a certificate for that. Just in general, like being open to trying new tools, right? And not being maybe so traditional about it. I know, because I know there are people like that too that are completely refusing to touch any AI.
Yep.
Maybe, that is not so good for the long term, but yeah.
I mean, Excel was a new tool at some point, right? And Excel was something that everyone was going, what is this going to do to the market? So I think there is not, the size and scale of that parallel can vary, but I do think it's still appropriate. Any other thoughts on that, or anything else regarding kind of how a candidate might position themselves with this, where, besides the things we've already addressed? I was thinking about, oh, please, Catherine. No.
No, I was going to say I prefer seeing Pivotal 180 courses on resumes to AI certificates. And the only thing I would add is I enjoy working with people who are open-minded about learning new things. So I don't necessarily need to see or want to see an AI certificate, but having a conversation with somebody who can see the benefits, have sort of a practical view of the future, right? Not show, not being in a conversation where it's just all doomsday and gloom, but rather saying, okay, this thing is here, and somebody who's going to be consistently evolving is somebody who's going to be open to things that are changing in the world. So just being open-minded and having a willingness to learn and grow. So effectively what Koski may have said, but in slightly different words.
No, I appreciate it. I really do appreciate that we keep coming back to the idea of openness, curiosity, and creativity in this. Because again, I don't think that's always necessarily the conversation in the finance space. It's not thought of as that. It's thought of this technical skill-based thing, which it most certainly is. But it does go back to being a very human industry, very relationship-based. I actually was thinking a moment ago, I'm not sure we all have had these colleagues, but I've definitely had colleagues in the past who might not be as qualified or technically gifted as you might say, but they're just the most enjoyable, personable people. And so they'll often stick around a lot longer than you'd think they might be capable of, because they're just great to be around. And it's nice to have someone that you work with be great to be around, even, and if they can deliver passable work, then like that's great. Let's stay with that. The last thing I'll offer as a thought before we'll turn to some questions from the audience is, we've talked about a lot of these pieces, curiosity and the human aspects of it. Is there anything that you've seen in your time, as you've moved up and participated in the onboarding and hiring process of people, interviewing, et cetera, that you've seen something in an interview that triggered you to want to fight for that person to get a spot, right? That it made you that you saw one of those intangible things, you kind of felt that moment of like, all right, I think this person's right. Is there anything, like any anecdote or any thought that you might offer just as something that people might be able to synthesize in their own manner and take something away from it.
Yeah, maybe I'll start. At my last institution, we had a guy who was actually uh in the back office, and he applied for a role. He used to maybe middle office is a better term, but he used
Yeah.
to handle our like transactions when they were booked, and he used to interact with my team, and one of the juniors on my team said like, "Hey, I think we should consider this guy for a role on our team." And I was like, I don't know, he's in the middle office. And she was like, Just speak to him. I think I think we should really think about it." And just in talking to him, just hearing his story, and he really was very honest about like, "Hey, I didn't really take college seriously. Didn't get great grades, but like really have been this is what I've done since college, have like taken all these courses, blah, blah, blah. This is why I think I could really be a good fit on your team." And just honestly was so impressed by, his candor, his like drive. And we ended up hiring him, and he was probably the one of the best junior bankers I ever had.
Really?
And yeah, honestly, and he worked super, super hard, had a great work ethic, and everyone loved him, and he had a great personality. And and he is now on the client side somewhere. And I really, and it's like, just the combination of honesty, work ethic, and just you know not being afraid to own up to like, I didn't take college seriously, but here's what I've done since then to sort of, get back on track or whatever. Like I don't know, like I think that it really struck me as like being very authentic. And so maybe
Yeah.
back around full circle to your first question about like fit and personality, and like, what you say in an interview, right? Like I think sometimes, especially, when I interview, like do when I do like on campus recruiting, like sometimes people are so overcoached, right?
Yeah.
And you just hear the same thing over and over and over again. And it's just like, you know, I really do encourage people to like really think about the story that they're telling, and how they're presenting themselves, because like, I just like it really resonates when people are themselves and are real.
The graduate program I attended at Hopkins, the SICE, the International Relations program, there's a lot of former soldiers that come to that program to go do international roles, but they're transitioning very heavily out of what they were doing before. And they talk a lot about like, how do I synthesize? I did so many things in the military, all of which don't necessarily directly translate. But if I can package them correctly, they do actually translate to a lot of these things. I just need for someone to believe in it. And I found that a lot of them interviewed really well for that exact reason, is because they were just being super honest about what they had accomplished, and then trying to make the bridge between those two things. That's an excellent point, Nanda. I really appreciate that, Chris.
Yeah, I mean, I was just gonna say I don't think I've had anything like an anecdote around this, but I think that authenticity can kind of illustrate emotional maturity, which, we've just been
Wow.
talking about how much AI, is going to play a role in the space. I think that's only going to put folks, I think, in front of clients faster and faster, or in front of, other counterparties as you kind of move up the ramp from, just doing technical work to doing the actual deal work. And being able to respond to someone in a stressful situation, being able to own your mistakes, being able to kind of pivot the way that you interact with someone based on, kind of the emotional profile they're presenting. Like that is the stuff I think that really allows you to grow and thrive in a career, sort of once you've mastered the technical elements. So, to Nanda's point, I think if you can demonstrate some of that in an interview through authenticity, through like truly being, curious, vulnerable, recognizing your flaws and recognizing where you want to grow and how that fits with a company, I think that's something that would make me want to hire somebody.
I really like the idea of emotional maturity in that context, because you do think about the first few times you've gotten thrown into a room with some high level people, and you're nervous and all these pieces, but like there's an emotional maturity to adapting to that, and also to being able to meet them, and the fact that they're human as well, and we can all kind of meet in the middle here. That's a really excellent point. Well, I think I really appreciate all the thoughts and candor on the material here that I was presenting out to you. We'll turn now, I think, to please keep the questions coming through on the chat. We'll try to respond back to anything that we can't necessarily address in person. But I think we'll start with there's a question here from one of the panels, one of the attendees, saying that coming from like a younger perspective, like a real junior position, obviously, the skills are learnable. Modeling is learnable. The hard skills are attainable. But from the kind of either side, what's the judgment that separates like a good junior performer from a great one? And again, these are all, we're going back to these kind of squishy intangible pieces. So anyone have any thoughts or anecdotes on like what are those styles of judgment or type of judgment, or maybe how they present the information, presenting that judgment that separates like a good junior analyst associate from a great one?
I think I'd like to think that it's more on the storytelling side. Again, a lot of the people I get to work with, they're smart, ambitious, people. They know how to do the analysis well, and they're very coachable. So if there is a thing that they need to learn, they take that pretty well. The main thing that I think a lot of people need to work on at the analyst associate level is on storytelling. And there are a couple components to it, right? The first one is knowing when to ask for help and admit that you may have a gap in your analysis, or maybe when, like, let's say, let's just give an example, right? Like, let's say, very simple, let's say the PPA price has gone up in your model. And then you punch also a few other changes, and then the sponsor IRR goes down. Okay, interesting. So if you just punch the numbers and just move on, okay, fine. And then you're just going to present the results and say, oh yeah, like the IRR went down. But if you're someone who is, who wants to get better at both the storytelling and also just, want to be better, you're going to first look into, okay, well, why did this happen? What should I expect when a PPA price goes up? When the power purchase price goes up, should I expect the IRR to go up or go down? Well, I would expect to go up. Why did it go down? Okay, let me take a look at some of the other changes I've made. Could it be this? Could it be that? And if you can't figure out, my rule of thumb is you need to go up to your senior person, whoever's managing you, and say, look, here's where I am. I made this change. This happened. I'm not entirely sure why this happened, but here is, 2 to 3 suspicions. Here's 2 to 3 things that come to my mind, maybe the cause. What do you think? Like, which one do you think is, or in another case, for instance, something happens and then you don't know what the next step should be. So just going and saying, okay, these are what I think should be the next steps. What do you think? Right? Just thinking 3 steps ahead, like put yourself in the shoes of your manager and say, what are the first 3 questions that person's going to ask? And then proactively try to answer those and then come back to them with that. When I see that type of initiative, when someone comes back to me having already thought, what the implications are, that's someone that I know can take a step back, go out of the weeds and then be able to look at the broader picture, right? And then, of course, there is the storytelling, and it's mostly over email these days, although it could be verbal as well. So one of the things that I want to do better, for instance, in our Columbia courses, talk to people about writing emails. I mean, sounds simple, but and actually, this is an area where I think a lot of people could get help from AI, to be honest. Like if you're not sure, if you want a little bit of help, ask Claude to polish up your email. But getting to the point, not belaboring for 5 paragraphs about all the things that you've done. If you're trying to get the point of doing a model is to get a decision maker to make a decision. And
Right.
So you don't need to tell me the 25 steps that you've taken in the model to make this change. I already trust that you're going to be able to do that. What I need to know is what is the outcome and what should I be thinking about? What are the pitfalls? What's the decision?
And then when you have those gaps, you have the humility to bring it to me that you have a gap, but you've also then not brought me just a problem and a gap that you have in your knowledge. You've brought me thoughts about how to solve it. I think that's a really interesting perspective. I appreciate that, Goxie. And actually, so shifting here to another question, I think is interesting. Someone asked if passionate, hungry, personable, these things are like subjective qualities. And so like with these, they can be interpreted different based on cultural norms and biases or gender or other pieces. Like, um, does any of this lead to, inconsistent evaluation across candidates? Are there ways in which are you letting the technical speak above this at times to make sure that you're not kind of caught in too much of your own? I was thinking actually to Catherine's point a second ago, we also have our own we also have our own sort of confirmation bias. So one of the things a great junior might do is challenge the assumptions that we're already making, just not to disagree, but simply to say, I want to make sure that we're not stuck in a similar thought pattern we've been in for a long time. I want to push that a little bit, but it's an interesting question to kind of take this objective or and make you this subjective reality and see how the objective becomes a part of it. Any thoughts on that? Any thoughts on the way we navigate those things in the space when we are looking at these intangible, passionate, hungry, personable, how we define them?
I can appreciate that it comes across as subjective, right? And my interpretation of what that looks like could be different from someone else's based on what was just mentioned, cultural, et cetera. I do think, though, if somebody wants to be in the job and wants to perform well, that comes through in their own way. I think there are times where people have interviewed really well and then they get to the job and they don't always show up right on time, or they said they'll get something done by 10:30, but it comes in, at 5. Like those, there are some very factual things that can demonstrate someone's ability and interest in the role that they have. And I do think owning your work stream can show up in whichever way is most authentic, to use the word, to you. Um, that's how I would answer that question, but I can appreciate where that question is coming from, and it's a good one. And I know at least here in our interviewing process, we design our interviewing process so we can get different opinions, both cultural tests, but also the modeling tests, et cetera, to sort of help ensure that it's not just like a group think exercise.
No, and I appreciate we've been sitting in the sort of subjective space for a bit. It's like, you could take a pivotal course and an AI certificate. Like, I think everyone would love if it was like, you do these three things, you are guaranteed a job. And I think maybe at a certain point in time that was a bit more. But even then, I think back in the day when like you could have gumption, whatever that is, and then gumption would just get you an entire career. And so I do think that's still there, right? That's still a piece of it. And it is, I think that's good for us to grapple with because it's tough to define. And in being tough to define, it creates apprehension on the other side of like, well, how do I have it if I don't know exactly how to define it? Um, but I think this panel has done some excellent work in giving some parameters and some definitions to these pieces. So I appreciate that. To a bit more of a technical piece, because I've seen quite a few questions pop up around this. A lot of people are wondering about the interplay between these spaces. So I think about this a lot. I come from the debt side of things and was told pretty early on, like you pick and choose. It's debt or equity. And then there's variations go from equity to advisory or debt into like maybe a developer and help them with their capital raising kind of stuff. There's other pathways, but there's also kind of a divide. And I don't necessarily know if that's true. And so I want to get your thoughts on the ability to move between these spaces, between the idea of like IB or private equity or into debt or into whatever advisory roles or into developers. Like, where do you think there are actual barriers that are challenging because of maybe the technical skill, or do you think that those are usually kind of those barriers are maybe a bit overblown?
I mean, I think to some extent the barriers are overblown because I think you have to really understand all of it. Um, but I mean, I think so I'm somebody who's done debt my whole career, but have done advisory as well. And if you're good at being a debt, like if you're good at being a lender, you have to think through equity's perspective, right? When you
Yeah.
negotiate a term sheet, like you're thinking about what is the sponsor perspective. But like the reality is am I going to go be an equity investor now at this stage of my career? Probably not, just because mm, you know, I haven't done it. could I do it? Yes, but have I done it? No. Like, I mean, I think like not like none of it is rocket science. Somebody on the equity side might disagree and say, no, sorry, it is rocket science, but
Everything we
like
do is rocket science.
everything we do is rocket science. That's correct. Um, like I think that I don't think that like I don't think that it's impossible once you understand, like once you're in the space and you're actually actively thinking through it, because you have to truly, to be good at any part of the cap stack, you have to understand the full cap stack, right? But
Right.
I just think that it like once you become entrenched and more senior, it just like it becomes harder to move because that's just the way the industry works, I think. But I don't think that like realistically, like I don't think that you can't do one thing or the just because you haven't done it. I
And
don't
so
know.
in theory, at the lower levels, there could be more permeability.
There's more
I can,
fluidity. Yes, I think that the reality is that as you get more senior, it becomes harder to move.
and it's really just a matter about positioning. Actually, that none of that's another question that came up, and I'll pose this to the group generally. Um, if you're moving in at a senior level from outside the space, is that a feasible thing to do? Is there opportunity for that, or is it typically everything is sort of grown from the I would say the middle level up? Again, it's one of the ideas where someone has 20 plus years of experience in certain fields and is trying to transition, right? It's hard to come in as an analyst. So it's like with 20 years of experience and something that might be applicable. What would be your thoughts on what might be a possibility or an option for someone in that position?
Sorry, if you have 20 years of experience,
Like adjacent experience, like policy or law potentially, or you've been working on like advocacy. Think about renewable energy space, people who work in like renewable energy advocacy work, where
yeah.
you're around the concepts and you want to help the financing side, you want to work on the financing side, or the market's tighter where you are, and you're thinking like, okay, I'm interested in continuing to work with these things, but I'd like to get on the side that builds them.
Yeah.
If you've got that, can you transition somewhere in the ecosystem? Is there a good role or a good place to look?
Yeah, I mean, maybe you could do like biz dev or something like that if you have relationships. I don't know. Like, I think it's probably hard to transition into, say, like banking,
Yep.
right? But I mean, I think that there's probably somewhere in the ecosystem that you could go, like if you have relationships. But like, can you be a lawyer? No, because you're not a lawyer,
Right.
right?
Right.
But
That
I
law
think
degree is really a tough thing to get around.
exactly. But I think yes, there's probably elsewhere in the ecosystem you can go.
Yeah. I think you can look for shops that like have a bit of kind of overlap. So, I spent time in kind of the green banking universe, and there's a lot of policy elements that drive, how those programs develop, the markets they can serve. And so I think that I've seen people come into that from a policy angle and start doing a bit more strategy. And then as that strategy evolves, you're creating a new financial product, you're working with a finance team, suddenly you're doing finance. So I mean, I think there are ways to do that, but yeah, I think to Nanda's point, I don't think you're gonna like go from being a 20-year policy person to like a first year analyst at an investment bank.
I
Yeah,
mean, or
I
maybe if
think.
you're willing to be a white belt, right? If you're willing to go back, it's like, look, I'll take my licks. I'll go in and I'll work with the group.
Yeah, yeah.
Catherine?
Yeah, I was going to share. So I was in energy markets before project finance. So I had like 8 years of energy markets experience before. So not 20, but it's funny, the way I made my way into project finance was because I went to go work for a developer who had a lot of community solar in New York, and they needed some help explaining how New York VEDR works
Yep.
to the banks. And I had just come from like specializing in New York energy markets. So for me to explain VEDR was a relatively straightforward process. And so for like 6 months, all I did was just explain, and this was, quite a while ago now, but all I did was just explain New York VEDR to our lenders and tax equity investors. And in doing that, I got to learn project finance.
You were a
So
storyteller. You spent 6 months as a professional storyteller.
I don't know if I
And
would call myself I mean, I definitely got, it was great. It was a great entryway into meeting bankers and investors because I got grilled my first 6 months in the industry, but it was Actually, I wouldn't have wanted it any other way because you really learn what the risk points are for the folks that are giving you money.
For sure.
But that's one example that, not 20 years, but something that worked for me. And to be frank, the reason I was able to get that job at the developer was because of my relationships. And so, we keep mentioning that, and that's what got me to that role.
Well, when we think about it from two aspects, right? It's the relationships for who we know in the various industries and who we could reach out to might help shepherd a resume through, et cetera. But it's also when we think about it, like from Nanda's perspective, talking about if you're going to go into a shop, if you don't, you need to bring some value with you, right? If you're new to this, so the relationships that could generate business and actually like create a deeper ecosystem for them, that could be that's so it's value chains in two ways.
Yeah.
Goxie, your thoughts?
Thanks, Dylan. I think anyone who says Vido is straightforward is being humble. So I'm sure you were a great value add. Um, I agree with everything that's being said. I think at the more junior levels, it's definitely possible. Do I see a lot of examples of it? Not really. I do have one good friend who moved from private equity to lender to now developer. And I will say maybe he's more of an exception, but he excelled at all three of those roles. And he's an ex-government person too on top of that. So, jack of all trades, you can say. You don't see that often. There's definitely some benefits, especially if you're kind of coming in and out of a developer or IPP environment, understanding what your financial counterparties, how they think like could be a huge benefit, or vice versa, right? Going from a IPP to, let's say, a tax equity investor or credit seller. Now you're able to bring that value of how do developers think about it. But as you move up, it's hard. Actually, we did see this in during the IRA period, right? I mean, you had all of these companies popping up, like Crux is one example, for instance. I mean,
Yeah.
it was a lot of it was not necessarily industry veterans. It was people from outside the industry coming in, and they arguably had many years of experience in other areas, real estate, tech, etc. And they came in with a fresh thought. So maybe this is not exactly what you were getting at, but it is possible to come in with, from outside, but there has to be some sort of a fault line, some disruption in the market for you to kind of squeeze your way in. Otherwise, I don't know. I don't know if it's very fluid at the higher echelons.
I mean, it's interesting contextually, right? AI is somewhat of a market, shifting kind of tool. So it's possible that that has a similar impact as the pandemic and the IRA and the whole reality of that part of the market, or even now the OBBB and the kind of shifting and changing aspects of things like the tax equity market. There's going to be some rift and movement in that, some heating up and cooling in various places. Um, interesting question. So interesting question, kind of taking again the going the opposite direction. So if someone asked if how portable is renewable finance experience, right? So they have that experience itself into someone who wants to move into like different real assets, like from like something that's like a different consumer adjacent investing seat.
I mean, it depends on what is the nature of the asset. If it's infrastructure, real asset, if it's any kind of cash flowing asset, I could see a lot of course. You have to think, right? What is it that we do at the end of the day? We are reading a bunch of documents and then we are laying out the cash flows in a spreadsheet. At very basically, of course, there may be 100 tabs in that model, fine, but that's what you're doing. So if it's an industry or a type of asset where you have some sort of predictable cash flows based on a set of documents, the exercise you're doing about finding the risks and then allocating them to various parties through contracts is fundamentally the same thing. So I could see a lot of synergies there. That is not to say that you cannot move to a different type of industry where you don't you don't have predictable cash flows. You can. A lot of the fundamentals I think carry over, and this is what we like to say in our class at Columbia, right? We're not trying to make you all bankers. We're not trying to make you all project finance bankers. Some of you will end up going that route, and that's great. We do have 12 years of precedence showing that. Our alumni are all over the industry. However, even if not, even if you're going to an adjacent industry, I think the concepts that you learn when you do project finance is very applicable, right? Like because what you're learning to do is you're learning to think on your feet, and you're learning to mitigate risk. You have to, at the end of the day, you have to pay someone to take that risk, or you have to pay a third party to make a report about that risk, and
Right.
someone else needs to get comfortable. So those are, I think, very valuable meta skills that could
Yeah.
come handy in a wide array of industries.
And I can imagine, like, going back to the idea of storytelling, you've got to be a bit of a storyteller if you're going to take a set of skills that are related and package them in a way that says, no, no, I'm here to solve problems on your end, right? I solved them over here. These are the pieces that I took in, and now I'm going to go solve them on your side.
If
Um,
if you think, Dylan, this is, I think, the first thing. I don't know if Amir, you still have that same slide. This is still the same slide for Columbia. The very first class, the class opens with this question: how does a company who doesn't have any employees, who's never generated a single dollar of cash, who doesn't own any assets, is able to raise hundreds of millions of dollars to go build a project, right? And to your point about storytelling, if you can tell that story, I mean, imagine what else can you do, right?
yeah, that's excellent. That's a great connection there, Amir.
And maybe just to build on what Goxie said there, there's the old adage, even though I don't fully subscribe to it, that there's been nothing new invented since Aristotle passed away. And in the world of project finance, there's an element of truth to that. The roots of project finance are in how, Greek merchants 2,000 years ago used to ship things across the Mediterranean. We've just been finding new ways over the last 2 millennia to apply those same skill sets in new contexts. And the jobs we have today, everyone on this panel and many of you listening, did not exist 5 years ago. And the jobs you'll have in 5 years' time may not exist. So I just want to completely build on what Goxie said is how do you take those analytical tools? How do you bring your critical thinking skills to bear and then use that to communicate, to tell a story as to how you're going to solve the problems of tomorrow?
Truly non-recourse finance if all the people that had recourse and all of your gold are at the bottom of the ocean. It's a bit of an easier premise. But Nanda, I saw you come off mute. Did you have any thoughts?
No, I mean, look, I think I'm somebody who in my career, like I've always done project finance, but I've done everything from infrastructure to LNG to renewables to now digital to like if you understand the basics of project finance, which is just the non-recourse nature of it, the structuring, the cash flows, like the actual like basic tenets of project finance, like I
Yeah.
do think the skill set is fungible, like across asset classes.
I've actually been, I was talking to some students recently asking about the tax equity course that we teach. And I was saying, if you're interested in it, you should take it. If, the market's going to change, the market's shifting, it's a lot of movement that, there's fewer, and talk about like few seats. There's very tight amount of seats for those particular roles. But the act of going through this and expanding your brain and having to think through the really challenging pieces of how things move through this really weird financing vehicle is expanding your mind in a way that is probably going to be helpful somewhere else. Even if it isn't directly helpful, if you don't land in a seat building exactly tax equity models, I think the exercise of expanding your thoughts around this complex thing is going to be beneficial no matter what. Chris?
I think, yeah, I think in addition to the kind of the structuring and complexity that comes with like the project finance skill set, I think that being able to underwrite an investment is a pretty transferable skill set and
Yeah.
to like literally any role. Like my wife is a project or a product manager, and just the investment of time and resources and like compute to launch a new software product. I think you have to think through the same things, like what are the nuances of the market. At Generate at the moment, we're focused on, large load like, everybody else is. And like the differences in how different utilities and ISOs write their tariffs that, enable you to move quicker or not to power for a large load, change and can be the difference between, billions of dollars in 2028 or 2035. So I think learning that skill set is extremely transferable.
I appreciate that. I don't think I have the wherewithal to synthesize this entire conversation down to any nuance, but I do think that the opening idea of how to compete and be present in the AI market is to be even more human, and to level on the skill sets that truly do separate you in that way. I think curiosity and energy have been a theme that have run through a lot of this conversation today. And authenticity, again, I think it's interesting to come back to these. I also do appreciate, we've talked a lot about, again, it's not rocket science. The barriers to entry aren't as high and as thick as you might seem. Not everybody has to take the path where they go through a top 15 school into a top 15 MBA right into the role, and they cookie cutter their way through the whole process. It's not necessarily like that. And I think that's a healthy thing to do for the market, because that's not usually the external message as much as we would like it to be. It's often much less human and much more about the barriers. Whether that's purposeful or not, that's not entirely the concept there. But I will take just a moment here very quickly, for the not so shameless, but the quick plug of we have talked about actual hard skills here to some degree, and financial modeling and the aspects of transaction analysis and the realities of project finance analysis, as skill sets broadly, but as skill sets specifically are something that we believe we have a decent amount of expertise in. We have the top course here highlighted because if you're transitioning or you're trying to find your way to the market, or you're coming out of grad school or coming out of undergraduate from a different field, our intro course is a great way to get a lay of the land, working all the way down to the things like our tax equity course, where if you really want to bang your head against one of the weirdest financing mechanisms that exists, like, please come do it with us. We'd be happy to have that kind of brain ache with you.
Dylan,
But
one thing on that, I feel like I need to plug that in. We actually do have a more kind of intro tax equity course that I'm
yes,
collaborating with Pivotal. That's going to take place next Wednesday and the following Wednesday. So that's June 24th and July 1st. So this is what we call Tax Equity Essentials. It's 2 days, about 6 hours of commitment. There is less modeling and more about just the process of raising tax equity. And when we say
yeah.
tax equity, this includes credit transfers as well. So if you're curious about that and want to kind of dip your toes in tax equity, that's also a great place to start if you're trying to, understand what this weird thing is.
I really appreciate that, Goxie. That's a great point. Yeah, our essentials course, again, one of the things we pride ourselves on is trying to break things down into their component pieces and bringing you something that's digestible no matter where you're coming from in the mix. But I will I'll leave this up here, but I'll offer any final thoughts from any of the panelists. It's an interesting job market. That's why we decided to have these webinars, and hopefully have brought some interest and curiosity from our attendees and those who will watch this later on. But any closing thoughts from any of you, I welcome them, including Amir as well, who hasn't had as much of a chance to speak. He's been manning things on the back end.
Keep it up. I think there's a lot to be optimistic about. I would rather than worry about some of these trends, just double down on your own skills, your own, what you're bringing to the table, and hopefully you got a little bit of an idea of what employers look for from this panel. And always happy to keep in touch. And thank you.
Yeah, I'd echo that. Thank you for for joining and for having us. And I'd say if you're listening into this, you're kind of on the right path. So just keep talking to people, keep getting smarter, and keep working at it.
Excellent. Well, I think we've. Oh, actually, you know what, Amir? Amir is also our resident poet. He's the poet laureate of Pivotal 180. I'm not going to ask him to give us any Hafez or any other poetry that he has thousands of verses memorized, but I will pass it to him for some final thoughts, because I would be remiss if he didn't get a chance to offer him before we closed out.
Oh, now you're putting me on the spot here, Dylan. I would just encourage perseverance. You're going to face challenge and adversity as you go through the job search, especially in a difficult market. But if you're seeking pearls, you'll need to dive into the ocean and dig deep.
I couldn't have asked for a better way of saying that. I want to thank you to everyone for attending. Thank you to our panelists. I really appreciate. I know that you guys have incredibly busy lives, incredibly busy schedules. As we've discussed, the hours in your day are not shrinking with AI. They are only expanding the volume of transactions sitting at your doorstep. So we will cede back our time for you and wish you all the best in what you've got going in your own days the rest of the day. And for the attendees, like please reach out to Pivotal 180, reach out on LinkedIn through the list of all of us here, and hopefully we see you across the table or in a role or in a class very soon.